Another tip I give to people as well is ask the question and then shut up and let them fill the silence. As an interviewer, I'll be honest, it takes balls to be able to ask the difficult questions. I don't try and overload my guests with difficult questions. I'll maybe try and warm up to it. Your job as a host is to create that comfortable environment, that comfortable relationship that you can ask a question that's going to probe a little bit. The biggest measure is not actually your downloads, it's your engagement. They look at how long people are listening to your podcast. You can take that word podcast out of it. And then I would say, make your name as obvious as possible as to what your podcast does. Welcome back to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I started my first podcast in 2019 as a hobby, and it is now in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. I then started 7 Million Bikes podcast, where we've now worked with hundreds of podcasts, produced thousands of episodes, helped with millions of downloads, and helped shows get to the top of the podcast chart. In this show, Smarter Podcasting, I share everything I've learned along the way, all my tips and my tricks and my failures and my mistakes. And I also talk to other people who have podcasts and who are experts in the field. And once a month, I also do a podcast audit for a brave soul who puts up the podcast for me to look into. So I'll look into their podcast, not for the content, because that's not my field of expertise. I'll look at the technical aspects of that podcast. My guest today faced a massive challenge in 2020 when he underwent neurosurgery. He was able to regain his fitness and actually competed in his first Ironman. He then created the Comeback Plan, a simple framework designed to help men. He now works full-time as a Director of Transformation and Change at BDO, Jersey in the UK. But his personal mission is to inspire meaningful change in other people's lives. And he obviously did that through the best way you can, through a podcast. He created Own It, the Comeback Podcast. My guest today is Tim Guest. Tim, thank you so much for coming on Smarter Podcasting.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me.
You are very, very welcome. I'm really excited to share your inspirational story and learn more about your podcast. I'm obviously massively passionate about podcasts. I think someone asked me a question lately, like, do you listen to podcasts? And I was like, I literally listen to podcasts pretty much from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. I've abandoned music and I love music. There's something about podcasts that I think are incredible to be able to connect with people. But what inspired you to create a podcast after everything you'd been through?
So what inspired me to get into podcasting? So it was actually a mutual contact of ours, Michelle O'Brien. So Michelle and I worked together a long time ago, mid-2000s, I believe, in Manchester. We stayed in touch online, and Michelle's podcast, The Upward Spiral, was actually what inspired me to give up alcohol on my own kind of journey. I reached out to Michelle and said how beneficial her podcast to me was, talked a bit about my story, and she said, hey, come on my podcast. So I did. I found the experience almost therapeutic in a way, talking about my challenges and my struggles and kind of how I came back from that. And I thought, I want to do this as well. Not for fame, not to make money, but kind of as a tool to kind of, just help others, particularly men. My demographic is men in their 40s and 50s. So just, offering something to help people to kind of regain their fitness was my inspiration for doing it.
Amazing. I love that. And podcasting is such a small world, because I've actually done an audit for Michelle, which you may or may not have listened to. So that's really exciting. Well, let's get into it. So I always ask the same questions of everybody right at the start, so we know what we're dealing with. So what equipment do you record with?
So I use Riverside.ai. I think it's Riverside.ai, but it's called Riverside anyway. So it's a really cool recording studio. I've got a Yeti Blue microphone. I've got a Logicam HD Pro webcam and these headphones as well.
Nice. And how do you do your editing?
So I do all my editing myself. I do it within Riverside. So Riverside's really cool. I did some editing many years ago when it was sound wave editing. But this new, so Riverside records both audio channels as a separate stream. So you can edit each individual person's what they're saying just by highlighting the words and chopping them out and things. I had one guy actually who used the phrase, literally after almost everything. And then when I heard it back, I was like, oh, that's, yeah. And I was just able to highlight them all and remove them all. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So I started off with GarageBand, which was just waveform. And I loved it at the time, obviously, because it was a new skill. But then it became pretty laborious and it's quite difficult. You can't really see what you're editing. So it's kind of, for people who don't even know what I'm talking about, because most new podcasters these days would use like a text-based editing service like Riverside or the Script. You can see what people are saying, so you know what to cut. Like you're saying, oh, I could see people saying, Whereas with GarageBand, you didn't know what was coming, so you would hear the and you're like, all right, I got to go back, cut it. Then you listen, oh, there's another one, I got to go back, cut it. And it takes like a long time. So that's good. I know Riverside is really good as well. My next question is, what is your podcast niche?
So podcast niche is men in their 40s and early 50s who are maybe a little bit stuck in their life. They may have once been fit when they were younger. They then got bogged down in midlife with work and family and really, neglected their self-care and who are looking to kind of redefine their purpose in life.
Awesome. Love it. I love that you have a specific niche. Now, what makes your podcast different than the other 250,000 podcasts that are published every week?
Well, I haven't listened to all 250,000, so I couldn't say for definite. But I think what I like to think makes mine different is that it's real men sharing real stories with real tips for how they've improved their lives. And it's relatable. It's not someone who's, elite athlete, who's some god up on a pedestal. It's real men, just like you and I.
Awesome. And what is the goal of your podcast?
I'd like to grow the audience following, and I'd like to be, a globally recognized podcast for supporting men in my particular niche market. My viewer numbers or my download numbers, each podcast has had around about 1,000 views. I've got just over 7,500 downloads now, which, considering I've not really pushed it that much, I think is quite incredible. But I'd like to go more than that. I'd like to be getting, 7,000 a month.
Now, I think you may be able to answer this, or maybe you've slightly answered it already, but what lessons or values do you want the listener to come away with at the end of each episode?
I'd like people to feel inspired, that they can make a change in their life, to think, I like to follow a format. We talk about what's the problem, and it's a relatable problem. We then talk about, how the person fixed their problem, and then we break it down into usable chunk that the user can go and take away. And it would kind of be inspiration and people to kind of have a plan to make the first step to change their own life.
Love it. And you've clearly given a lot of thought to this by your answers to these questions. So that probably is why you're getting so many downloads. That is amazing. Yeah. So do you realize what those download numbers mean? Because I know that's a big question that people always ask.
The answer probably no. So I use Buzzsprout, and it gives quite detailed analytics of who's downloaded and where they're based, countries and stuff. But it doesn't tell me how long people are listening for example. So I don't really get much feedback from it other than just, you've had 10 downloads today or 50 downloads. And it's like, great, but that's all I know.
Well, I'll tell you right now, 1,000 downloads per episode is huge. Did you know that?
No? Okay. Wow.
It's absolutely massive. So let me just quickly look. I always refer to the Buzzsprout. It gives you global stats. It's buzzsprout.com/stats. And if you get 1,000 downloads in the first 7 days of an episode, you're in the top 5% of podcasts in the world.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So you are doing incredible. And from your answers to the questions that I was like, it shows that you know what you're doing. So that is amazing. So well done on that. So you. I hope this audit is going to help you, because you get bigger numbers than I've ever had in terms of weekly downloads. One of my biggest strengths is the length of my back catalog. So I have about 370 episodes. I've been doing my main podcast for 6 years, and 80% of my downloads comes from the back catalog. So my biggest thing right away would to be encourage you. I know you're going to start season 2 soon. It's just keep on going, because you will keep building that back catalog. Your download numbers will just go up and up and up, and start to look at the total downloads per week, not just per episode, because people will go back and find that. So that's amazing. So I did look at your podcast. Obviously, I've gone through it. This interview has been a long time coming. We've had some back and forth and some barriers, some things that have blocked us, but we're finally here. So I'm excited to share this with you. And the success of your podcast then is incredible. If you're at 7,000 downloads in 7 episodes, is that what you said?
7 episodes, yeah.
Wow, incredible. So the advice I'm giving you is based on I always tell people, like, I'm just going to give you the knowledge that I've learned along the way and shared. It doesn't mean that it's right, but hopefully what I will share with you today will help take your podcast to another level for season 2. So let's get into the first thing, the show name. One of the biggest things about the name that I noticed is that it doesn't say what it's about. And there's actually many podcasts with a similar name. So if you Google it, there's a lot of podcasts come up about the comeback. There's even one by the Church of the Latter-day Saints. I had a friend who'd a podcast called The Comeback as well. So I would look at making the name as really specific as possible. And then the other big suggestion, I would say, is drop the word podcast from the name. And this is advice I always follow. It's from an amazing podcaster called Adam Shively. And I've read it on other things as well. And I truly believe in it because people already know it's a podcast. So they're already looking on Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts, right? Now, my podcast is called, or was called, a Saigon podcast. Then it became a Vietnam podcast. And I just changed it like a month ago to Discover Vietnam. So I only just dropped the name podcast from it after 6 years. So you don't have to do it. I've done it as well. I did it when I started before I knew that. I was like, oh, I'm going to take away the word I'm going to use, it's a Vietnam podcast, right? But as I've learned, I think it does make sense because you have very limited real estate with your name. If you look on Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts, and someone's scrolling down looking for a new show, they don't have, there's only like, I think it's 70 characters or even less, something like that. So you can take that word podcast out of it. And then just, I would say, make your name as obvious as possible as to what your podcast does. One of the things I would also recommend is getting your own website, because once you have your own website, you can get traffic coming to your domain, to your asset that you own, not Buzzsprouts. So that means that you can analyze the traffic, you can create the keywords, measure the SEO. If you're sharing links to Apple or Buzzsprout or Spotify, you're sending people to somebody else's website. You want to send people to your own website. So that's a big one as well.
I've got my own website, but I just don't have a link to the podcast on it. And then I guess it sounds simple to do that because I've just always published the link to Apple or Spotify podcast. But as you say, you're sending traffic to someone else's website. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I used to do the same as well, 100%. And the thing is as well, Apple and Spotify only make up about 60% of total podcast listens. Because they are the biggest brands, everybody thinks they are podcasts. I mean, I have people ask me all the time, like, I mean, just last week, a client said to me, is there anything else apart from Apple and Spotify? And I was like, oh my God, there's about 30 more. So they only make up 60%. And then the thing is, I can't remember the exact stats, but 50% of the population own an iPhone. The other 50% own a Samsung or an Android-based phone. So if you own an Android-based phone, you just do not have Apple Podcasts. In fact, that's a lie. They've literally just changed that. They've made Apple Podcast available via browser, but still nobody's going to do that. So it's pretty much, if you own an iPhone, which I do, but I still use Spotify. But if you own an iPhone, you've got Apple Podcasts. If you don't use an iPhone, you don't have access to Apple Podcasts. My point is, if you only share those two links, you might be losing listeners because 40% of people don't use either of those apps. So that's a big one as well. In terms of like names, I just came up with some random suggestions. I thought about how to make it that it's really obvious about what it does. So I started off with 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast. I thought it was catchy and quirky, but it didn't really say what the podcast was about. So my ideas was something like using the word self-improvement at the beginning of your podcast, because that's what your podcast does. And it means if someone's scrolling, they're going to see self-improvement and right away they're like, that's what I want. If it's the comeback, as I said, there's a lot of different podcasts about the comeback. It doesn't really say what it is. So some of the things I wrote down was like the comeback, self-improvement, true grit, self-improvement, overcoming setbacks, self-improvement, action, grit, ownership. So just to try and make it a little bit more specific. As I'm saying that though, your podcast is already doing amazing. Maybe not best to change your name right now. I would suggest that if your podcast was still trying to build and gain listeners. But what I would look at doing is adding at least a tagline that gives a further explanation of what it actually does. So when someone is scrolling or someone's interested and they come back, they click on it and then they see that. Cool. The other thing I was looking at was the show artwork. So when I looked at the artwork, I thought the text was too small and too thin, because 70% of people listen to podcasts on their mobile phones. I think it might even be higher than that. So you have to remember this, the artwork on a mobile phone is tiny. I mean, you can barely see it anyway. So I see it very often. People put very small, like, hosted by in very tiny letters at the bottom. Nobody can read it. So what you want to do is just make any text, and it should only be like 3 words. There should really just be the title on the front, big, bold letters. I'm not a designer, but I know you can choose certain colors that pop. So don't use like colors that don't stand out. And then I would use a high resolution picture as well. And that would just make it stand out when people are scrolling on the phone. And then similar for the episode artwork, it's good that you have episode artwork, but it was just too many words, so too difficult to read on a small screen. So,
yeah, because I think on the episode artwork, I tend to put the title of the podcast and then who the name of the guest is. So you're saying maybe just reduce that slightly so it's easier to see on the phone, yeah.
And you can look at my show, a VNAM podcast, or this show, Smarter Podcasting, as an example. The temptation is you want to put everything right. You want to put who the guest is and all of that stuff. But the reality is people just can't read it. So I just have 3 or 4 words, big, bold. I have 1 picture or 2 pictures, not too busy. Try and make it stand out as much as possible. And again, it took me a while to realize, just try and put yourself in the shoes of the user, the listener, who's generally scrolling on the phone. So think about how you would listen to podcasts and then how people would find it. Then one of the things for the show notes, I read all the time, and I disagree with some people. I disagree with a lot of people on this. People, you might have read this, they say, put keywords in your show notes. Have you heard this before? I think it's completely useless. I don't understand how that would do anything at all, because from my limited knowledge of SEO, it relates to Google. So one of the things I recommend is, as well as having your own website, have a blog post for every episode you do. Because if somebody is searching for something, the blog post will come up. It's very unlikely that your podcast, unless they type in the exact name of the show or the exact name of the episode, if they were to just type in men's health or men's improvement, something like this, a keyword related to what you do, your podcast is not going to come up on Google search. But if you have a blog about that exact topic that's filled with keywords related to that topic, and then the podcast links are on that blog post, that is much more likely. So we do that. We create a blog post for every single episode, and we've had blogs that have one of the ones that we're getting the most hits right now is about podcast background ideas, and we did that because we did a bit of keyword research, and it showed up that people were searching that. So we did an episode about podcast background ideas. So think about that as well.
That's a great idea. And certainly, and nowadays as well with AI, it's so easy to create a blog post with the, Riverside will give me a transcript and it'll give me a summary. And, you can then stick into ChatGPT and get it to write a blog post. You can then edit. And so you can get 80% of the blog post done for you. So yeah, another great idea. Thanks.
That's literally 100% what we do. So I do have a girl on my team who writes the blogs, because it does take a little bit of time, and it definitely needs a human touch. I mean, this is the thing with everything AI. Everybody thinks it can do everything. It can get you 80% of the way there, absolutely. And we get the transcript from Descript, we put it in, and then we say, and then, she adds some keywords, we'll do some keyword research. So leading into what I was going to say about the notes, for me personally, don't worry about stuffing it with keywords. Again, it's one of these things that people love to tell you. It doesn't do anything but put those keywords in Google. This is just my opinion. What I do is I write the show notes in the first person. And I know not many people do this. I think it creates a much more personal connection with your listeners or potential listeners who are scrolling through, or they're going to see, that episode looks good. What's it about? And they click on it. I don't think the show notes are super valuable, so I don't think you should spend too much time on them, but we do have a template. Our template is the first line. And again, thinking about when people are scrolling on an app, the show notes, they literally maybe can see like the first line. Like, let me double check right now. Let me look on my Spotify just to see what. So I'm scrolling down. Yeah, there's 4 lines you can see on Spotify. I'm not too sure on Apple Podcasts what it is. So you literally have 4 lines which is, I don't even know how many characters, to grab people's attention. So what we do is we take a quote from the episode and we put that in captions, who said it, and it's literally just 2 lines, very short quote, but that summarizes the podcast, or something like a hook that intrigues people, that they're going to be like, oh, wait, what's this about? And then we write the show notes in first person. So I spoke today to blah, 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 or I think this, because my personal feeling is it creates a much more personal connection. I don't have any stats or data to back that up. That's just my opinion. So I actually wrote out one of your show notes in the first person, just to show you the example of how it would be different. So it could be something like, this isn't just another self-improvement podcast. This is about action, grit, ownership. Hosted by me, Tim Guest. I've been through the fire and fought my way back after brain surgery and a brutal battle with depression, alcohol, and prescription drugs. For men in their 40s and 50s who feel stuck, out of shape, and questioning if their best days are behind them. Each episode, I bring you raw, no BS conversations with men who've overcome challenges and clawed their way back, whether in fitness, mindset, or life. We're talking real challenges, real wins, and real strategies you can use to take back control. No excuses, no waiting for the right time. This is your wake up. Your comeback starts now.
Yeah, I like it. Quite simple, but again, I get your point. It's more relatable if it's talking about me in the first person. So yeah, I mean, if it's like a corporate podcast, I suppose, are always written that way, but when it's more personal, you want to be appealing to people on the one-to-one basis. So yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And one of the things, and I think you already seem to be aware of this, is just be careful with AI, because when you do put it into AI, it really frustrates me. They start, anytime you ask ChatGPT or AI, because they're all using, I think, the same kind of engine or whatnot, it starts with, in this episode, ... And I won't say the name or anything, but there's a big podcast by a big media company that I listen to, and I love the podcast, but I looked at the show notes and literally every single episode was like, in this episode, ... And I was like, it's so boring. It's obviously used, people can see it's ChatGPT or AI immediately. I get it. It makes sense. In this episode, we're going to talk about, but it just doesn't make your podcast stand out, and it makes it look a little bit amateur as well. But what I think is great, what I did see from your notes and from even what we've talked about, I could tell right away that you know your audience, which is amazing. It's for men in their 40s and their 50s. So it's really good to have a clear niche and know exactly who you're targeting. So that's when I look at your podcast. Now we'll go into the production side of things. So when I listened to it, I turned it on. The intro, the music is really good. It was only 8 seconds, which is great. You'd be surprised some podcasts, the music can go on for 30 seconds or half a second. So it was good 8 seconds. The intro to the podcast was really good. You said the podcast name, what it is, who you are. You said why you're the guide and what the podcast is about. So that was really good. And then you introduced the guest and who they were in relation to the podcast. So I was really impressed with the introduction. That was great. The only thing that I would say that what we do that works really well, and we do it for all the podcasts and all the clients that we work with, is we start every episode with a 30-second hook. So we take 3 or 4 sound bites from the episode, something that's catchy, something that's intriguing or a question or controversial, and we'll move that to the beginning. We'll put some music and stuff over it, just because those first 30 seconds are so important. So it is good that you have a good introduction, because it is where you can lose people. On YouTube, they literally tell you that 50% of people will leave within the first 30 seconds. That blew my mind when I first learned that. I was like, wait, what? Half the audience goes within 30 seconds? And then recently I started digging into my stats, and you mentioned you haven't looked at your consumption rates, where you should do that on, you can do that on the Apple Podcast Connect website and Spotify Creators website. You can find out your consumption. When I looked at that, the average was about 70 to 80% of people are still listening at 30 seconds. So you are going to lose people. It's not as much as YouTube, but you can see those numbers dip. And if you can keep people longer than 30 seconds, there's more likely that they're going to get to the end. So that's partly why we do that hook at the beginning. And we've seen, like, even on YouTube, we've seen like 60, 70% of people still listening at 30 seconds. I think is the highest we got. But we're definitely always around the 50% or a little bit higher still listening at 30 seconds. So it definitely
Yeah.
does work. Yeah.
Yeah, people have very short attention span these days, and it's when you looking at music, for example, my kids, if I play them a song, if they're not interested within the first 3 to 4 seconds, no, this is rubbish, let's move on. Do you mean you've got a whole artist back catalogue you can listen to? You can't say this artist is no good based on 3 to 4 seconds.
It's great. I mean, and for the short videos as well, that tells you, so you have, well, I think it was like you have 3 seconds to grab someone's attention, and apparently now it's like half a second. And I'm like,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that's true. When I'm scrolling videos, like do I want to watch it? Yep, no. I will counter that though, because I do disagree slightly. When people like long form content, like podcasts, like you're making, I'm making, people love it. People don't have a short attention span when it comes to that. I think what people have is a short tolerance for poor content. Basically, there's so much content out there. So they will make that decision within 30 seconds. Like if I don't like this within 30 seconds, there's another 250,000 podcasts. There's another 1,000,000 YouTube channels. There's another 1,000 shows on Netflix I can watch. So that's what I think for the podcast medium, why we have to grab them. Not so much that they have a short attention span. They just have a short tolerance for that, which brings me up to the sound quality, right? So the sound quality was good in the introduction, but then it dramatically dropped off in quality, which is even more noticeable because it was good in the introduction and then drops off. The first sound on the episode I listened to, the first sound was and then it was the fifth word was as well. So we're talking about those filler words, like those were really, they stood out right away. Like the first, after the introduction, the first words, and I think it was by the guest, if I remember, I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but the sound quality after that was really poor. So I'm really impressed at your download numbers, because for this quality of the sound, I thought people would have less tolerance. That's where it will be interesting if you go and find out your consumption rates, because it will be worrying if you're getting all those downloads, but then there's a massive drop off. And maybe people do really connect with the content, so they are putting up with that poor sound. But for me as a podcast producer, like we want to have the best sound quality. And I do think for me personally, like I wouldn't listen to a podcast with poor sound quality. I just wouldn't put up with it. Because I know, and I'm normally listening with, everyone's listening with AirPods these days, or noise cancelling. The sound is right in your ears. So I would really look at that. And I'll explain why the sound quality is bad, because now I know the answer. There was also as well something that really puts me off. There was a lot of mouth noises, like immediately. So if you've got the gain up too high, or you or the guest haven't maybe drunk some water, if your mouth is dry, you can really hear those mealy mouth noises, which make me a bit nauseous, to be perfectly honest. So that like really put me off. And then what I actually did was I downloaded your episode and then I put it into Descript, because I didn't have access to your Riverside, obviously. And I could detect the amount of filler words, and there was a lot of filler words. It was over 1,000. So when I did an analysis, there was 646 repeated words. Was said 150 times, 151, 150, so 31, and then it kind of went down a little bit as well. And actually, I'll show this on the video if anyone's watching this on YouTube. I won't be able to show you right now, but I'll send you the picture. I did a screenshot of the text, and you can see how much filler words were used. It's like, the start of it was, hello, welcome to Luke Jones. Oh, sorry, it was you, it wasn't your guest. For those of you that don't know, Luke is a husband, father, and it goes on as well, and a lot of you knows as well. So I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I just automatically removed all the filler words just to see what it did. It removed 10 minutes from the episode just by doing that. What it does for that just makes it flow better. And we are talking about people have less time these days. If you can take out 10 minutes of your episode, but make it more to the point, sharper, better, it's going to just make for a much, much better podcast, obviously. And then, so as a host, as a producer, I would just work on getting the sound better. It will really help with the quality and the professionalism of the show. One of the big tips I always give to people about interviewing is try and avoid open questions. It's really difficult. I was a stand-up comedian as well, and that's something I learned from stand-up comedy. If you talk to the audience, don't give them an open question, because you'll be sitting waiting there for them to answer you. Just ask direct, pointed questions, yes or no, or something that you know where are you from? Do you agree with me? Yes or no? Not something that they then have to think about. And try and avoid like repeated, redundant phrases. So things like, oh, before we get into it, just get into it, I think I've written down here, I don't know if you actually said this, but I think an example would be, I don't think you did say this, but for an example would be, so anyway, before we get into it, just give us a quick background. Actually, I think you might have said that. So just look out for things like this. It's just something as an interviewer, I didn't do it in the beginning, and it's something I've gotten better at over the years, is just ask pointed, direct questions, direct to them.
Yeah. So with the questioning, so what I find works well to actually get more information out of people is the open question. So, Luke, talk me about your struggles with alcohol. Are you saying that we shouldn't ask questions like that and we should make them more direct?
I think that I would say that's not so open because you're telling them exactly what you want to say, like tell me about your struggles with alcohol. But to make it maybe even more pointed to get more value out of it, you could say something like, tell me about one of the biggest challenges you had in your struggles with alcohol, or share a story about one time that you had a problem that alcohol affected your life. And they're probably going to, if they're comfortable with it, as an interviewer, it's difficult. I'll be honest. I mean, it takes balls. It takes, a bit of gumption to be able to ask the difficult questions. I don't try and overload my guests with difficult questions. I'll maybe try and warm up to it. I try and do all my episodes when I do a Vietnam podcast that I'm going to ask at least one challenging question, and I've never had any negative feedback. I've never had anyone say, oh, I don't want to answer that. Normally we have a good enough relationship, which again is your job as a host, is to create that comfortable environment, that comfortable relationship that you can ask a question that's going to probe a little bit. And, you should prep them. They know what they're getting onto the podcast about, so they're kind of prepped. But you could say, we're going to explore some deep topics in this podcast. Are you okay with that? Are you comfortable with that? So that when you do ask a question that is going to really get to the deep stuff, that they're going to be comfortable with it.
Yeah, cool. And give them time to answer. I mean, this is one thing. I'm not a professional interviewer, but, I was taught questioning techniques as part of actually in recruitment, many years ago. And it surprises me the amount of professional interviews you hear on radio and TV that answer their own question. They'd be like, so Luke, tell me about your struggles with alcohol. Did it affect your family? What did your kids think of you? Did it affect your job? It's like, shut up, let them answer the question.
110%. I forgot to even mention that. That's another tip I give to people as well, is ask the question and then shut up and let them fill the silence. And it's something I learned from comedy as well. It's really difficult. It's challenging. And I think that's why some interviewers, they fill that silence because they don't want to wait. The other beauty of editing is that if you give them that time to think, I never leave more than 1 second of empty space when I'm editing. So if they think for 5-10 seconds, you could just cut it out afterwards as well. And the other thing I listen to, I always look out for crosstalk. So when there's two voices competing at the same time, and there was none of that on your podcast, so that was great. It's just something we kind of mentioned earlier, podcasting, a podcast like a one-on-one relationship with the person listening. And so I try not to, for me, my opinion, when you have a podcast like yours, like an interview podcast, I try not to fill that with too many voices, so nobody talking at the same time. And I didn't notice that in yours, so that was great. Then to finish up, the link. So then at the end of your podcast, you always need a call to action, and you want to link this to the goal of your podcast. So for you want to get more people to listen to it. Your CTA, your call to action is pretty simple. Subscribe, share, don't miss an episode, turn on the notifications, like things like this. I've gone back and forth whether it's worthwhile doing that, but the data shows it is worthwhile doing it, because just giving that reminder to people. And I only just started turning on notifications recently for podcasts that I like, and it's the best thing I ever did, because I literally get a notification, new episode, and I'm like, it's crazy. I will listen to it almost right away. My favorite podcast is The Rest is Football. I'm a big football fan. And as soon as there's a pop-up that there's a new episode, I'm immediately listening to it. So I would make that your call to action. This here is one of the most challenging things to do. I would not give the call to action to your guest. All right. So you've spent the time and the money and the energy to create the podcast. Don't then give it to someone else. And it's challenging in the beginning, because we all listen to podcasts where they say, oh, well, tell everybody your LinkedIn or your website, or where can they find you? One story I heard about was the guest did a similar job to the host. I can't remember the exact niche. So then the host was having people contact him, asking for the guest's contact details. And he's like, oh my God, so you're selling your services, right? And I know you're not selling services and things like this. So for your podcast, I guess it's not the end of the world, but you really do want to just have one clear call to action that you want people to do. And for you, I think that should just be follow, subscribe, share the podcast with other people, share the podcast with other men in their 40s and 50s. I think that would be the best thing to do in it. I would do it that you don't promise it to your guest. If you don't tell them, don't say, oh, come on my podcast so we can share your LinkedIn or whatnot. Just don't offer it, and then just don't do it. And then they won't say anything. They won't be like, oh, you didn't share my thing. You've just given them an hour of free airtime. And then my last thing is, I would end your podcast semi-abruptly, because I learned this from a well-known YouTuber, or he runs YouTube channels. It's for the way I believe that even Apple promote podcasts or show it to more people. Spotify's probably the same as well. The biggest measure is not actually your downloads, it's your engagement. They look at how long people are listening to your podcast, because, you know, if you have 100,000 people listen to it, but then after 30 seconds, there's only 1,000 left, they're going to be like, okay, this is not good content, right? I'm not saying that's yours. I'm just saying as an example. And then what I learned is, if you signpost the end of the episode, if you're like, oh, one more question, or this is my last question, or one of the things that frustrates me when the credits come up and then it's like, you know, our executive producer is blah, blah, blah. You always just skip that, right? You never listen to it. So what that does is it just drops off the engagement basically, right? And then overall the algorithm or whatever technology it is can see that they don't know that why that's happening. They just see that your engagement has dropped. And so it affects your overall engagement rate. So they advise that you just, without being rude, just end the podcast quickly and swiftly so that the listener doesn't know that it's about to happen. So Tim, I'm going to do that right now. Thank you very much for coming on Smarter Podcasting and being a guest. Remember, if you like this episode, then please rate, review, subscribe, share, turn on the notifications. And the best thing that you can do is share it with somebody else who wants to make the best podcast possible. And if you want to work with me and 7 Million Bikes Podcast, then go to 7millionbikes.com and book a call with me, and I'll be happy to share with you how we can help you make the best podcast possible. Tim, thank you so much for coming on Smarter Podcasting. I'm excited to see how this can help your show grow even bigger than it already is.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.